Thank you, Jen. Well, first tonight, are schools struggling for cash? Research by Wales Live has found that school budgets have fallen by around £370 in real terms for every pupil in Wales. That's since 2010. The head of one primary school has told us that he's had to let a quarter of his staff go during the last 4 years, and delivering the curriculum is becoming more of a challenge. Here's Paul Martin.
Penarth in the Vale of Glamorgan, one of the most affluent parts of the country. But it seems its schools, like many around Wales, are feeling stretched financially.
Morning, ladies. Everything okay? Yeah? Any news? Anything breathtaking?
It's the start of another busy day at Evenlode Primary School.
What have we got? I hope it's not a bill.
Steve Rees has been the head teacher here for 8 years. The school has around 450 pupils.
We do incredibly well with what we've got, but that's partly because I've got very committed staff that are prepared to go that extra mile.
Steve, who's also a representative for the Head Teachers Union, says his school is now on the edge financially.
The school is dilapidated in many areas, and we haven't got any money to cover that. If my boiler breaks down this year, I simply don't know where the money's going to come from.
He says money worries are now affecting all parts of school life.
I can show you areas, particularly with outdoor learning, that have fallen into decay and we simply can't afford to replace.
But he feels the biggest impact has been on staffing.
It's had a dramatic effect. It's a quarter of the staff that's disappeared in the last 4 years, and that's basically down to the fact we can't afford to employ them. It's having a direct impact. Obviously, if you've got targeted children, groups of children that benefit from additional support, those children simply aren't getting it anymore. It means with our more able children, perhaps children that could do with being pushed a little bit further, we're unable to support them in the way that we have been able to.
And the pupils have also noticed the lack of funds.
We used to do lots of things out of the class with other members of staff, but now there's not really as much of that because they don't have enough staff.
We need some new art materials because you're having to reuse old ones and they're drying out.
So why are schools like Evenlode finding things so tough? Since 2010, the money the Welsh Government receives from Westminster has been reduced. But the government here has promised schools will be protected. And on the face of it, they have. School budgets have even increased slightly. But we've been looking at the impact inflation has had in that time. It's wiped out those increases, meaning in real terms, school budgets have fallen significantly. We estimate that budgets were £370 lower per pupil last year than in 2010. That's a real terms cut of around 6%. And schools in better off areas like this one may be feeling the squeeze more tightly, as with fewer pupils eligible for free school meals, they don't qualify for a big slice of the government's pupil development grant, which is now worth around £1,000 per pupil per year. Further along the coast at Castlucur Primary in Swansea, it's party time.
It's so good because people are dancing and having lots of fun, shouting and enjoying.
And this disco is also a chance for the school to make a bit of cash. It's organised by its Parent-Teacher Association, which last year raised thousands of pounds for the school fund. Money's tight here too. The cash raised by parents has had to be spent on essentials, fences, classroom supplies and tarmac.
In an ideal world, we should be topping up, providing money for the school trips and for nice things, parties and things like that, rather than buying tarmac, really. But that's not the way the world is, and unless the government are able to give schools more money, then that's the way that we will continue to do it, isn't it?
Whereas perhaps before we were enhancing their education and, sort of adding the little extra touches, now we're having to come further and further down the line.
The head teacher at Evenlode doesn't feel his pupils are getting a fair deal on funding.
It makes me feel very frustrated. It makes me feel very angry. And I simply feel that, Welsh Government needs to be honest with schools. I think above all, perhaps Welsh Government needs to sit back and look at the priorities.
Steve said he's had sleepless nights about the school's finances. And although the situation varies from school to school and council to council, senior figures in local government think further cuts to school budgets are inevitable.
Paul Martin. Well, Kirsty Williams is the Cabinet Secretary for Education. I spoke to her earlier and began by asking her whether she thinks schools in Wales are underfunded.
Well, I'd be the first to recognise that these are challenging times for all public services, and unfortunately education has not escaped the consequences of reducing budgets for the Welsh Government. And clearly Mr Rees and other teachers are making difficult decisions as they manage their school budgets. What's important for me as I take over this relatively new role and go forward is that we do what we can, and my priority is to get as much money to the front line, to our head teachers and individual schools, so that they can do what they need to do for the children of Wales.
But when you've got parents paying for tarmac and you've got a head teacher worried about the boiler breaking and not being able to afford to fix it, something is seriously and urgently wrong, isn't it?
Well, clearly, those circumstances are challenging circumstances. So what is the Welsh Government doing about that? Well, in the Vale of Glamorgan, where Mr Rees is a head teacher, in the Band A programme of our 21st Century Schools programme, £32 million has been spent on improving school buildings. In the Band B programme that we recently announced, the Vale of Glamorgan will receive funding of £134 million to improve school facilities and school buildings. We've been able to bring forward £40 million worth of capital investment so that those issues around school buildings can be addressed.
But it's not working, is it? It's not working. We've seen the problems. And you used to be so angry about this. Let's take a look now at how you were in opposition.
It's not credible to say that £533 difference that exists between England and Wales doesn't have an effect on the outcomes for our school children. But as funding for the pupil premium increases in England, children in Welsh schools will fall further behind their English counterparts.
Too many of our schools underperforming, all of them underfunded.
That was your anger back then in opposition. Now you're in charge. You've got the power to change things.
Absolutely.
Are you going to change things?
Well, absolutely,
for
of course.
Wales' children?
Absolutely, of course. You just hear me there talk about the pupil deprivation grant. I've now renamed that the pupil development grant, and we've put more money into that so that we can catch up. This year we will spend £93 million on Wales's poorest children, and I will make no apologies for that. Mr Rees said Welsh Government needed to prioritise.
We factored that into our figures, and anecdotally we're hearing that more and more schools are using that now just to pay staff. It's not going to special services for deprived children. It's being used for basics.
£93 million this year will be spent on the education of our poorest children. I've been very clear about prioritising closing the attainment gap in Welsh schools, and I'm not going to make any apologies for targeting that money at those children's education that need it the most. £20 million on the education of children with additional learning needs. Again, a category of children who've not perhaps in the past got the support that they need. Now, I would love, of course I would, to spend more money on Welsh schools, and that's why I've taken money out of my education budget. I've put it into the revenue support grant to local government so that they can support the front line.
Okay,
so that means an additional £170 million made available to local government to find their way.
As they can. But we've
find
heard,
their way into schools'
for example, in your own patch today, a report to Powys councillors saying, look, 5.4 million of a deficit. This is endangering the whole council. That's in your own backyard.
Yeah, that's right. And the report that has gone to Powys County Council has been very critical of the way in which school budgets have been managed. And I have recently, in recent weeks, written to Powys to seek assurances about how that council is going to support individual school budgets. We can't escape the fact that because of the continuing austerity, we didn't see a single mention of education in the recent Westminster budget.
Okay, but we need to blame Westminster. What about priorities?
Well, we are prioritising.
Now, the health budget is going up in Wales, and it's about half the whole government spend. How does that make you feel when you're fighting your corner for education, when you see offices being opened abroad for the Welsh Government? Do you think, please, Carwyn Jones, let's spend on schools?
Well, and that's what we're doing. We're making difficult decisions around the Cabinet table to prioritise money to local government, because schools are funded in two ways. Primarily, they're funded by their local authorities. And if we see those budgets decimated, as they have been in England, then individual schools aren't going to get the budget they need.
And they'll have to cut more.
And that's why we've made very difficult decisions around the Cabinet table to put more money into local government to prioritise frontline spending on schools. And that will mean £170 million over 2 years that local authorities have got to prioritise schools.
What can you say to people like the headmaster there? Will things get better for him and for parents and children worried in schools right across Wales? What do you say to them?
Well, I will do my very best to prioritise that frontline spending. As I said, I've taken money out of central education budgets to get it out to the frontline. So we will restrict some of the things that we would do centrally, because money in individual school budgets has to be the priority. Keeping teachers...
And on top of this, all of this, the pressure on schools, you're changing the curriculum, you're piling on the pressure on teachers.
Well, I have high expectations of our education system. I want to raise standards for all our children. I want to close the attainment gap. That's why we will focus on our poorest children. And I want to make sure we have an education system in Wales that is a source of national pride and public confidence. And I'm not going to make any apologies for having high expectations. And when I meet with the Head Teachers Union, they share those high expectations, and we will work together in difficult public expenditure rounds to ensure that the money is spent wisely and is spent delivering against those goals of raising standards.
And just a word, at very tricky times in government, of course. You were one of the first ministers to come out and back Carwyn Jones following the death of Carl Sargent. Lots has happened since then. Do you still fully support the First Minister, the way he's handling all this?
Of course, I welcome very much the steps the First Minister have taken in place to establish independent inquiries. I welcome that very much, and I have full confidence in the First Minister.
Kirsty Williams, thank you very much.
Thank you.